everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Universe Within podcast. This episode of the show is being sponsored by my friends over at a company called Real Mushrooms, realmushrooms.com. Sky Chilton and his father, Jeff Chilton. I interviewed Jeff a number of episodes ago. Really interesting guys. I really enjoyed that conversation with Jeff. And it's a company that sells and distributes medicinal mushrooms in powder or capsule form. I was really happy to have these guys come on. I think they were very much in alignment with the values of the podcast. As you all know, a big part of this podcast is about plant medicine, holistic medicine, and I think the benefits of medicinal mushrooms are truly fantastic, and I think there's really a growing body of work that's really showing and alluding to all of the amazing properties that mushrooms have. They sell a lot of different mushrooms, things you've probably heard of, like reishi, chaga, lion's mane, turkey tail, cordyceps. Those are all mushrooms I work with. They're part of what I consider for myself a really holistic supplement regime. And the thing I really love about their company, not only are they really good guys, I think they're really ethical guys, but the product is really amazing. It's all 100% mushrooms. They're organic, and that's really rare. For better or for worse, the supplement industry is highly unregulated, and so often when you get supplements, you don't necessarily know what you're getting. You may be getting some mushroom, you may be getting a bunch of fillers and other things. Oftentimes, even when you're buying what may be a mushroom, it may not have any of that mushroom in it at all, unfortunately. Even some of the big, I think even the biggest company that sells mushrooms, actually it's not the fruiting body, not the mushroom itself. It's the mycelial, which is grown on grain, and then those things are mixed up and then sold in a supplement form. So not only are you not getting the mushroom itself, you're getting the mycelium mixed with grain. So it's one of the amazing things of Real Mushrooms is it's exactly that. It's real mushrooms. So it's 100% mushrooms, organic. So you're getting a really good product. You're getting the actual fruiting body, the mushroom itself, 100% of that. And again, just really great guys. I'm really happy to have them on and supporting this podcast. So if you'd like a really good product, you'd like to start working with medicinal mushrooms, check out their site, realmushrooms.com. And also listeners of this show, if you go to their site, realmushrooms.com/universe, you get 25% off your first order, which is a really good deal. And I think once you start working and tasting their products, you'll really see and feel a big difference. So thank you to them. And I think that's it. And without further ado, here is the intro to the show. On this episode of the podcast, I sat down with Paul Hutchinson. Paul is a really fascinating guy. He's had, I think, just an amazing life, a really rich history. He's a successful business owner, entrepreneur. Early in his career, he was helping a lot of people with PTSD, anxiety, trauma. And then at a certain point, he literally got a call to help with and become involved in the fight against child sex trafficking. That was documented in a very popular and well-known movie that was released, I believe, last year called The Sound of Freedom, which was based off of his work and involvement. So Paul and I sat down and talked about that, about his background, about what got him involved in that. Obviously, it's a very heavy topic, so just maybe a little bit of a warning that some of the subject matter that we discuss in this episode is very dark, and I think it's actually very important to discuss this work that we're doing working with plants. As I've mentioned this probably a number of times in this podcast, it's not all love and light. A big part of the work of a doctor, of a healer, is also going into the darkness areas of humanity, of the world, and even of other worlds, depending on how you look at your cosmovision. But it's a reality, and it's a reality that has to be dealt with. And I think the more that these topics are brought into light, the more light is able to be shown on them, and the more they can be transmuted. So it was a really fascinating discussion talking about Paul's involvement in that, what got him kind of the calling to that. We talked about religion, spirituality. And then at a certain point in Paul's life, he also realized that this kind of symptomatic remedying approach of working with individual or groups of children and trying to save and help them, while obviously extremely important, and that work should continue, because every child that's saved is truly a gift. But that also that wasn't solving the problem in its entirety. And what he came to realize is that he found the best way to really begin to get to the root of that issue was actually through working with plants, and that through working with plants, plant medicine, sacred medicines, that he was actually able to get to the root of these problems and actually begin to change people's minds, to shift their mentality, and get to the root cause of what was causing these traumas and what was causing these abusers to do what they were doing. So in that regard, it's very much in line with a big part of this podcast. So it's a really fascinating conversation. I think Paul's really an amazing human being and doing God's work. And I think the more, like everything, that we go into these very dark aspects of our humanity, of our societies, the more we're actually able to bring healing to them. And knowledge truly is power. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation. As always, if you're able to support this podcast, that's a really big help to me. Patreon is a really good way. It's really the primary way that enables me to keep the show going. It's a website you can sign up for as little as $1 a month. There's different tiers that you can sign up for. Those tiers also give you different things back. So I really like the idea of that site because it's also based on reciprocity. So if you feel like you're gaining something from this podcast, it's a way to give back. And those tiers give you some small things back, things like early access to shows, bonus material, Q&As. To all the patrons, to all the people supporting that way, as always, thank you very much for your help. And if you're able to do that, thank you very much in advance. If you're not able to, as always, just helping with the algorithms is a really big help. So if you're viewing this on YouTube or Rumble, hitting the subscribe button, turning on the notification bell, liking the video, leaving any questions or comments in the comment section. And if you're listening to this on Apple Podcast or Spotify, leaving a starred rating and a short review. So I think that's it. When this episode is released, myself and my colleague Merav Artzi, our upcoming plant medicine dieta in the Sacred Valley of Peru in November is sold out, but we just opened registration for our upcoming February retreat in the Sacred Valley of Peru. So if you're interested in working with plants, if you're interested in working with myself or Merav, who I also interviewed, that's a really beautiful opportunity to go deeper into this work. So I hope this finds you all well. Thank you all for tuning in. I think that's it for the intro. And without further ado, here's my interview with Paul Hutchinson.
Running out from the maze, running out from the maze, running out of the maze today. Running out from the maze, running out from the maze, running out from the maze today. I'm running out from the maze, running out from the maze, run out of the maze today.
Well, hey, thank you so much for coming on. I don't know how many of my audience will know you by name, but I'm sure when they start to hear your story, they will know of you. We were talking a bit before we came on, and I was introduced to you by, I guess, a mutual acquaintance. His name is Mike. And he introduced you to me via the film that you were a big part of. And I think probably a lot of people are familiar with that. It was a movie called The Sound of Freedom. It did very well. It was also a bit controversial, which I'm sure we'll get into as well, which is quite strange, but I think there's some reasons behind that. But maybe just to start out, if you could give the audience a little bit about your background, who you are. I mean, you've had a very kind of eccentric and full life. So I think it would just be fascinating for people to learn a little bit about you.
that I have, Jason. Yes, I have lived a full life. I have been a serial entrepreneur, had a number of successful companies. One notable one, especially for this conversation, is in my 20s. I built and sold a company that helped people overcome anxiety, depression, PTSD, addictions. I had 50,000 people a month calling in off of our infomercial to get help in overcoming these challenges. And many of them had anxiety and depression disorders to the point where they were debilitating. They couldn't work a normal job. Some couldn't drive. Some couldn't be, a good dad, good mom, whatever. All the roles in our lives are affected by that negativity. And unfortunately, Big Pharma makes billions of dollars a year keeping people addicted to Xanax and Prozac and all of these things that just really aren't healthy long term for the body and the mind. And so we had a cognitive restructuring program that helped people overcome anxiety and depression. We can talk about that deeper on the show. I sold that, invested in real estate, built a very successful real estate investment fund. In fact, I retired in 2017 from the company that I founded. At that point, we have 4,000 employees and over $20 billion in assets under management. I retired to focus full-time on philanthropy. And the reason that was calling me is that in 2014, I had received a call from our Attorney General saying, Paul, I know that you've donated millions of dollars to child-related charities, and I need to talk to you about something that's pretty dark. It's fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world, and good people don't know that it's happening. And he started talking about human trafficking and child trafficking, and we can go into the depths of it on this show. But I was asked to not only help fund some rescue missions of trafficked children, but because of the fact that I have a certain set of skills from a previous life that make me somewhat safe in a dangerous place, I was asked to participate and play the role of the wealthy buyer of these children. And the movie Sound of Freedom, I am the primary investor and executive producer. And the producer himself, Eduardo Verástegui, plays me in that film, the wealthy billion-dollar fund manager who quits his job to go help rescue children. And again, we can talk about this more in depth as well, but I've seen the darkest part of humanity in child trafficking. And about 8 years ago, I was introduced to a doctor who specialized in trauma therapy, PTSD, anxiety, depression, addictions, etc., and was using holistic therapy tools. And that's when I was introduced to the plant medicine world, and it completely transformed everything about my life. And so I'm now the founder of the Child Liberation Foundation, which helps to identify and rescue children, and also Liberating Humanity, which the focus of that is in elevating global consciousness and making it so we don't have problems like war, like domestic abuse, like child abuse, like child trafficking in our world. And the plants have played a huge part in us helping adults to heal from their own childhood trauma and some difficult things that they're holding on to.
So I think for the average listener, I think, I don't know the exact demographics, but I think most people listening to this are coming from the US, Canada, English-speaking places, England, Western Europe. I think people are familiar that maybe in far-off places there's prostitution, but they would usually view it as probably adults. Maybe there's some younger people involved, but that it's not really a problem that most people come face-to-face with. And I think the idea of child trafficking, I mean, one, there's something just so horrific in that even thinking about it is not very pleasant. But I think even when that idea comes into people's consciousness, they just assume that it's not really something that would happen because it's just too horrible to think about. Are you able to share with the listeners, I mean, maybe some statistics or just personal experience of what that issue actually is, the reality of that in the world?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, human trafficking as a whole is the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world. There's more today than all 300 years of the transatlantic slave trade put together, and good people don't even know that it's going on. It's become the second most profitable. Second, it surpassed the illegal arms trade, and it's soon going to surpass the drug trade. And so it's a big problem. And with children, there's estimated somewhere around 10 million children who are being sold, who are in trafficking. Now, the bigger number, and this is something we all need to be aware of. A lot of parents will say, oh, that's not happening in our neighborhood. Those aren't things that are happening around here, and even if they watch the movie Sound of Freedom, they'll see the storyline of that. Those things really do happen, but it's very rare that a healthy family gets a child that is taken and put in a container ship and taken to another country. That's fairly rare. What is most common is the fact that many children who are being trafficked sleep in their own beds at night. People are like, well, how does that happen? And the parents don't even know. Now, if they are being moved around, then they're usually coming from broken homes or foster programs, a broken foster care program, or runaways. In fact, people say, when they leave our movie, they're like, oh, I want to do something. I want to help. And I say that the worst thing you can do is go to Colombia and go try to rescue children. You're going to get arrested. You're probably going to get shot. The best thing you can do is go home and hug your children. And people are like, oh, how does that fix? Well, if you focus on creating a nuclear family, a healthy family, a place where your children can very comfortably come to you and say when there's something wrong, you're going to prevent 99% of the possible abuse situations and trafficking situations. You need a relationship with your children where they can very comfortably come to you and say, Dad, Mom, I don't like it when you tell me to hug Uncle Harry because he touches me weird. He says we should have secrets outside of you, or I don't like going to this friend's house because her brother's taking pictures of us when we're changing, and he tells us he's going to use it against me, or I don't like this babysitter because she's showing us pornography and says that we should trust her more than you, or we should have secrets, or whatever. These are all grooming behaviors, and so having those healthy relationships with your children. Now, let me tell you the real numbers here. Yes, there are 10 million children being sold, and it's not just in second and third world countries. It's right in your own backyard. But the bigger problem is this. 1 out of every 4 women who are listening to us today, 1 out of every 4 women that you know have been a victim of sexual abuse as a child. Now, about 40% of women at some time in their life. Now, with men, it's a little bit less. It's about 1 in 5, about 20% of all men at some time in our lives. But even them, it's 1 out of every 4. It happened under the age of 10 years old, and most of them in their own homes. So this is a generational trauma situation. That the overflow of this horrific thing that's happening in our own homes and our own neighborhoods, that overflow is somebody going to a foreign country or whatever and abusing children there as well. But these things are happening right underneath our noses, and it's important that we're aware of the statistics and aware of the fact that if you walk out in your front porch of your home in any neighborhood, I don't care if you live in an affluent one or a poor one, doesn't matter. You walk out in your front porch and you look left and you look right, there's a very high chance that one of those houses is a very dangerous place for children. And so, and I have a book coming out called it's The Sound of Freedom. You can go to Sound of Freedom book and get more information. And it talks in detail, giving parents tools that they need to keep their children safe, situational awareness, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, just on Liberating Humanity, you can get a lot of free tools that can give you the ability to keep your kids safe.
Yeah, I mean, before we started recording, I was telling you I spent about a decade in the Peruvian Amazon, and I was working at a big ayahuasca center there. And one of the things very early that I saw that was quite shocking to me, and again, most of the clients were coming from English-speaking countries, the US, Canada, England, Western Europe, Australia. But one of the things that really stood out was the number of women who reported sexual abuse, and it was something that I was familiar with. I mean, I knew it was reality, but the sheer number was quite shocking. I mean, I can't necessarily put an exact percentage on it, but I would say it was probably 40% of women were saying, and as you said, very often in childhood. Um, what what was it that drew you to begin to do this work? I guess one, what led you to realize that this was a problem? Because again, I think a lot of people don't. And then, do you have any idea of like what that impetus in you was that said like, hey, like I actually really need to do something? I mean, it was a little bit alluded to in the film, even, and I don't know how true that is, but this guy had to make a decision, and at first he kind of turned it down. I could imagine for all sorts of reasons. But then there was something in him when he was shown this photograph, that there was something inside him that just couldn't say no in a way.
Absolutely. So I helped to fund some of the rescue missions. And then I got a phone call from the Homeland Security agent that Jim Caviezel plays. And he said, and this is in real life, he said, Paul, he said, I'm here in Cartagena. There's not just 20 children. There's more than 50 that are here that we've identified, and more than 100 in the surrounding cities tied to similar trafficking rings. He said, we believe we could rescue all these children on the same day at the same time, but I need your help in a big way. And they said, well, how much do you need? Thinking he just needed money. And he said, I need you. Can you be in Colombia in 2 days? He said the head trafficker has a piece of property he wants to develop into a child brothel resort. He needs, a few $1,000,000 to build it out. He believes he can make tens of millions of dollars a year having a Jeffrey Epstein type island type of a thing. And so 2 days later, I was face to face with the most evil people on the planet negotiating this deal. His idea was this. He said, if you fly down here and tell this guy, listen, I'll fund your project under one condition. We're going to have a party. I'm going to bring a bunch of my rich friends. You're going to bring all of your quote inventory that you currently have. And if I like, what I see, then I'll fund your project. And so, I'm sitting there with these guys, and this is, I think, important when it comes to, transforming humanity. I thought that I would see people with these traffickers would have, tattoos on their necks and earrings in their noses and eyelids. And no, the first trafficker I met was a businessman in a white polo shirt and a, clean shaven. And the second I met was a beautiful woman that was a model. It was she was Miss Cartagena, running in the pageantry and having a fake modeling agency. She was luring these kids in, and I was sitting there at this table, and halfway through this meeting, one of the traffickers leaned forward and he goes, Pablo, I have a gift for you. I said, really, what's your gift? And he hands me his phone, and there's a picture of this 11-year-old girl. And he started talking about horrific things that we could do to this child. And I thought, oh my word, if we could get these children out before they're ever traumatized in the first place, that would be a miracle. And in the movie, my character says, no, I don't want to go. And it wasn't until Jim Caviezel gives, my character the picture of this little girl to my driver, and my driver shows it to me, and that changes. In real life, I was already there. I was face to face with these guys, just playing a role for the day. But seeing that child, that galvanized my commitment. And then what solidified it for life was a couple of weeks later, after we had met with the U.S. Embassy and the Colombian federal agents, we had the quote unquote party. And these guys brought 54 victims, and they put them in a separate part of the house. And because we were negotiating, we didn't want them seeing the guns and the money changing hands, et cetera. And they're already traumatized enough. And one of the traffickers stands up and goes, Pablo, I have to show you the gifts that I brought you. And he went in the house where the children were. And a few minutes later, we could hear a few of the kids crying. They were scared to death of coming out, meeting me, the man who was supposed to defile them. And I was so glad it was us there and not some monster. And the moment that changed everything for me, they had brought this little girl out, the same one that he had shown me in that picture, the same one that we had in the movie, Princess, or Rocio in the movie. he stood her in front of me. I was sitting down. I was this tall as I am right now, and she was standing up, and we were eye level. And all I could see in those little eyes was fear. And I made a commitment to myself, to God, to that little girl at that moment, that I would dedicate my life to eradicating that evil from the face of the earth. And since that time, I have led or played a key part in over 70 undercover child rescue missions in 15 countries. I've seen the darkest part of humanity, and I've seen such a beautiful light at the end of the tunnel with the rescue and rehabilitation and reuniting of the children with their families. In fact, the most beautiful moment for me on that first mission was after the agents came and stormed the party and arrested everybody, and Child Protective Services people came in with the children, and they started laughing. They started singing with these children just to calm them down. And that sound of freedom was the most beautiful sound that I ever heard. I started crying. I turned to the agent that was with me. I said, I've spent my whole life making money, making rich people richer. I want to make a difference. How can I help? And that's when I began my 10 years of undercover work in having no social media, no interviews, nothing, over 10 years. And we knew we needed to create a global movement. And we couldn't take millions of people to do undercover work and see what we had seen, but we could help millions of people feel what we had felt. And indeed, that's what has happened. Is Sound of Freedom became the #1 independent film in the world last year. And now we have opportunities to go into governments and help change laws and policies. And we can touch on this and go really deep into this. But about 8 years ago, my operators were getting burned out. They were getting burned out. They literally, Navy SEALs and Green Berets who had seen the worst part of battle after one undercover mission, is seeing an 8-year-old in those situations. They says, I know more. I can't handle that darkness. And so we began our pursuit of finding ways to release that PTSD and that darkness and that heaviness that my operators went through. And that's when we discovered the opportunity of the plants to completely release the pain that so many of us were feeling.
I mean, traveling around Latin America, certainly one can come into contact with seedy areas, places where you see prostitution. I mean, I was remembering a few years ago, I was on the border of Colombia and Venezuela, and with the situation in Venezuela, there was just countless refugees coming in, and there was all of these kind of like makeshift shanty towns being built on the Colombian border of these Venezuelans coming in. And I mean, you know, at that time, like the bolivar, the currency, you'd need suitcases of the bills just to buy like a cup of coffee. And in those shanty towns, I mean, I remember just seeing lines and lines of women who were selling themselves just to be able to make money. So I would imagine poverty is one of the driving factors that gets children in these situations. Are there other things that you've encountered that lead children to this? I mean, I'd imagine there's a lot of different ways a child can find themselves in that situation. But are there common profiles that you found that lead a child into that?
Absolutely. And you're right. Poverty is a big part of it in a lot of these countries. And the other part, like we touched on earlier, is broken homes, runaways, and especially in healthier families or healthier countries, not necessarily healthier families, because their runaways are not from a healthy family, but they're, broken families, and a broken foster care program is wrought with challenges in that space, and these children being sold. In terms of the traffickers themselves, many of them had experienced that darkness as a child as well. And the big part of what we're doing with liberating humanity is in taking away the demand side, because you've got, the supply side, of course, you've got the poverty, you've got the broken families, you've got those things, and the demand side is a whole different animal. If you can take away either one, the supply or the demand, then the business fails. And that's what our goal was as we were doing undercover work, I found myself 10 years later after I started that, I looked at the numbers and I realized there was more children being sold today than there was 10 years ago. And I looked at myself in the mirror and I said, Paul, if your goal is to eradicate child trafficking, you're not doing a very good job. Because every time we went in, even if we rescued 10, 20, 30 children, yes, we're making a massive impact in the lives of those kids and giving them their freedom. But if not enough was being done to fix the supply and demand side, then 20 more children would be sucked back into the deepest recesses of hell. And so, yes, the poverty thing is something we need to fix. Yes, the broken family is something we need to be working on diligently and holding your families together. But the demand side is where a big part of the focus is now on the healing. I found myself every mission. I wished more than anything that I had a time machine, that I could go back 5 years or 10 years before that child was ever hurt and either pull them out then or even have a sit down talk with the perpetrator and say, what is going on in your life that makes you think that it's okay to take that road before they ever hurt? Now, don't get me wrong. People say, oh, you're sympathizing. I'm not a pedophile sympathizer. I put my life in danger countless times to ensure that they never hurt innocents again. But from a consciousness standpoint, we as humanity need to take a few steps back and say, where is it coming from? Why are these people doing this? Somebody doesn't just grow up and at 45 years old decide, okay, I'm going to go to Colombia and go, be with a 12-year-old. No, that doesn't happen. There's already hundreds and thousands of bad things that have happened to them and bad decisions that they have made to get them to the point where they have that depravity. And I touched on this earlier, but the common thread with these traffickers wasn't tattoos and earrings in their noses. It was arrogance and greed and lust. And I'm not afraid to admit this. 10 years ago, when I got recruited into this work, that kind of defined my life too. I wasn't trafficking children. I wasn't doing anything, illegal. But, I had built a multi-billion-dollar company. I was Paul effing Hutchinson, right? I had a basketball court in my basement. I had 2 helicopters. I had a plane. I had, parties at my house with NBA players every other weekend and hot girls. And this was my life, and it was toxic. And yes, I was trying to fill that hole in my heart by doing a lot of charity work and even putting my life in danger and starting to do the rescue of the children. But the reality is, even that wasn't helping that inflated ego. Now I had the best panty dropper story on the planet. I'm a $1 billion company and I rescue kids and whatever, but it was toxic. And so the dramatic change in my life did not happen when I very first started doing undercover work. That was a big, big shift. When I realized that my, bubble of 50 plus cars and all this crap, didn't mean anything when you're dealing with that kind of darkness. But the major shift happened when I got a phone call from 2 of my operators, Jimmy and Andy. Jimmy had done 14 undercover rescue missions with me. Andy had done over 20. Most of our other operators got burned out after 1 or 2 and their PTSD was too much. And they said on that phone, they said, Paul, do you trust us? And I said, I trust you with my life, doing the work that we're doing. They said, well, you need to come to this transformational retreat. Now, I knew all about transformational stuff. I was friends with Tony Robbins. I had walked across coals. I had, done all these transformational things, rah stuff. And they said, no, this is going to be the most transformational experience of your life. Now that was saying a lot because I had done a lot. And, I said, well, what is it about? They said, well, it's a healing ceremony. I'm like, I don't need to heal. I'm Paul effing Hutchinson, right? And they said, no, you're on your 2nd marriage, headed for a divorce. Your kids hate you. Your employees are scared of you. You're hurting women all the time when you're, these parties, whatever. Yeah, you need to heal. I'm like, okay, whatever. And understand this. I I grew up very orthodox. My religious background, we didn't take any substances that were mind altering at all. I'm talking no alcohol, no no smoking, no tea, no coffee, no, I mean, all of that stuff growing up. Now I had left that church about 15 years ago, but I was kind of exploring the spiritual world. But for them to say that this lady is going to give us some, plants or going to psychedelics, I was taught my whole life those things are incredibly dangerous. Back in late 1960s, President Nixon decided to throw all of these tools under the bus classify them as Schedule I drugs. And so I literally thought that psilocybin was as dangerous as cocaine, not realizing that it's literally safer than table sugar. There's never been a case of addiction. There's never been a case of overdose. And when used properly, it can create tremendous change. And my background, my first successful company that I sold helped people overcome anxiety, depression, PTSD, and addictions. And I knew that world. I knew the cognitive restructuring world, and I knew it was going to take 12 plus weeks. And so for them to say that within 3 or 4 days, or even one day, I could have some transformational change, that was a big, big statement. But indeed, that's where my biggest transformation came from. And that's why we're focusing full time now on helping to heal humanity using tools like this in making sure that that toxicity doesn't continue. And we touched on this. Sorry, one little side note here, but just to round this all out, because we talked about where it's coming from, not just poverty, but here's some sad numbers. We talked about how 1 in every 5 men have been a victim of sexual abuse at some time in their life, and 1/4 of them as a child. God bless them, the good men, the majority of them who have gone through that pain grow up to be protectors. They're never going to allow children to be abused. However, 1 out of every 3, if not given the help, the love, the healing, the tools that they need, 1 out of every 3 will become a contact offender. And so our goal is to back it up before anybody ever crosses that line and say, okay, let's fix this. Now, even if somebody never grows up to be an offender, if they're one of the 2/3 that are protectors, it's going to come out. If you were abused as a child, it's coming out as anger issues and PTSD, anxiety, depression, etc. And so in order to fix child trafficking, in order to fix child abuse in the home and domestic abuse, etc., we need to help humanity change their hearts. We need to have them come with an open heart and connect with the divinity within them. That's the only way we're going to fix this. And if we do that, we save millions of children.
So before you came to plant medicine, I mean, I take it you'd been doing this work for a number of years. I mean, I think any listener listening to this would find it very hard to imagine putting themselves in your shoes. I mean, as you mentioned, that darkness, I mean, just being around that darkness, being in very dangerous situations where, I mean, if what you say is true and that child trafficking is going to surpass the pharmaceutical industry, I mean, maybe we can talk about the pharmaceutical industry as well, but I mean, that is a massive, massive industry. I mean, even this channel was certain videos demonetized for speaking about certain things during the COVID period. That was all by pharma. I mean, the amount of control and power, I think people don't really realize like how truly big that is. So if child trafficking is going to surpass pharma, I mean, I would imagine the amount of money that's going in there, which, money breeds power, power corrupts, huge amounts of money can corrupt in an exponential way. So, I would imagine you're just dealing with also very dangerous situations. What do you think it was about you that was able to do that? Because it's something that's interesting, even with plant medicine, something I saw, and because I also had a chance to work with Navy SEALs, with Green Berets, and fear is a big thing, and we all have fear. And anyone who says they don't have fear, I think, hasn't put themselves in certain situations. And one things that plant medicines will certain do is they can very much put us in places that will test that fear. But in this lived world, I would imagine that's one of the more dangerous things one could be doing. So, do you have any sense? I mean, a little bit in the film, there was this idea of God, which has also become quite an unpopular word in the time we're living in. But I mean, do you sense there was like some almost like divine inspiration in you? Was it just the thrill? Was it some just deep compassion? I mean, what was it in you that allowed you to do that when, as you were saying, there was Navy SEALs around you who were dropping out after one mission?
Yeah. First of all, small correction: the illegal human trafficking is soon going to surpass the illegal drug trade. Now, in my opinion, big pharma should be illegal as a whole with the crap they're doing. But the numbers are there with the illegal drug trade, but I think there's even more harm that's being done with the quote unquote legal stuff. But to a point on your question of that divine spark, I'll answer it with this story. I remember years ago, my son had just returned from a 2-year service mission, and while he was gone, I had separated myself from the church of my youth and got a divorce from his mom. So he was trying to figure out if I was a good guy or not. And so I put him on a plane like 2 days later, and we flew to Texas. We picked up a big influencer named Glenn Beck. He had a huge conservative audience, and we flew to Haiti. Glenn wanted to film some of the children that we had in some of the orphanages there in Haiti. And so we were filming for a few days, and then it was Friday night, and we were leaving about 6 a.m. the next morning back to the U.S. And the Homeland Security agent that Jim Caviezel plays, he said, Paul, I've had teams on the ground for the last 5 days, and they haven't found any traffickers. You're the best I have. Can you go out with them? And I knew that would mean I'd get no sleep that night. So I went out and connected with the top trafficking rings in the entire country. Ended up with one of the largest rescues over Super Bowl Sunday just soon after. But and I'll tell you how I did it in a second. The next morning when we were sitting on the plane, this was kind of my proud moment here because my son was there who was trying to figure out if I was a good guy. There was Glenn back there and the agent was there, and he just got briefed by some of the Navy SEALs, and he shook his head and he said, in 14 years in working with the CIA, FBI, Homeland Security, the best undercover operator I have ever seen is Paul Hutchinson. And my son smiles, and Glenn Beck turns to me and he said, why is that? You've never had any formal government training in doing this. What's the difference between you and everybody else? And I said, I'll tell you exactly what happened last night. We were out. It was almost 2 a.m. We hadn't found any connections with traffickers. And my operators there was a new team. They hadn't worked with me before, and they were, they're big guys and Navy SEALs and tattoos and earrings, and we got this. And I said, guys, can I take lead? Because I'm just me, right? I said, can I take lead? Are you good with that? And they said, yeah. Tim said, you're really good at this. I want to see what you do. I said, okay, you need to follow exactly what I say. And at this point, I had led a few dozen undercover missions and was very, very successful in finding the children. I say, follow exactly what I say and we will find them. I said, first things first, I need you to understand that I believe in God. I said, this isn't a religious conversation. I said, but this is what works. I said, most people believe in a supreme being. Some people call God the universe or Jehovah or a cloud or a rain or whatever. Some people think God's a man or a woman. Doesn't matter. I said, God exists and cares more about these children than you and I ever could, and knows exactly where they are. So if you're okay with it, even if you're not, I'm going to start out by asking for some help. So here we are, 2 a.m., downtown Port-au-Prince, Haiti, the darkest, most voodoo-infested place on the Western Hemisphere, and we take off our hats and offer up a prayer. And then I said, guys, now I need you to understand how I see fear and faith. I said, most people think that faith is going to church and asking God to fix things in their life that they don't believe are going to be fixed. I said, that's not faith. That's blind belief. That's not really faith. Faith is a principle of power. It's one of the most powerful laws in the universe. Next to unconditional love, it's the most powerful law in the universe. And it's simply this. It's the unwavering conviction that what I want to have happen will happen. Now, that wavering thing for you Christians out there in James chapter 1, it says, ask in faith, nothing wavering. The problem is that most people have a hard time with unwavering faith about anything. Should I start this new job? Should I marry this woman? Should I move to this country? Because they don't know if what they want is in line with what their God wants, what God wants in their lives. And so I believe that God looks down and he sees, these decisions, business and whatever else, and you adults deal with that. He sees what's happening to these children and says, hell no. If I've got good people willing to do something, I'm going to pave the way. And I've seen more miracles doing undercover work than I have ever seen my entire life. And I told these SEALs, I said, guys, have you seen the movie? And I said, here's something important too. Fear and faith cannot exist in the same person at the same time on the same subject. The reason behind it is in some ways, it is the same power. People who believe bad things will happen actually attract that into their life. People who believe that good things will happen actually attract that into their life. And so I said, so I might do some things tonight that you might think are a little bit stupid because I don't have fear. I feel safer here being protected by this divine power in identifying these children than I do sitting in my office in downtown Utah. I said, and then I said, guys, you've seen the movie Finding Nemo, right? And then the next one after that, Finding Dory, this stupid fish with a 2-second memory. And she keeps on swimming until she finally finds her parents are lost somewhere in the entire ocean complex. She finally finds them. I said, I might operate a little bit like Dory, this little 2-second memory fish, right? Because I'm not going to be listening to logic and protocol. I'm going to be listening here. And I put my hand on my heart. And these guys are like, okay, whatever. In fact, I'm writing a book called Are You Listening? With my hand on my heart, because in every one of these missions, finding these children wasn't following logic and whatever. It was listening and being led to exactly where these children were being sold and exactly what we need to do to keep our team safe. And so then I says, guys, just drive. They're like, okay, dude, whatever. Right. They're just driving. I said, okay. And I'm just listening from a heart space. And I said, okay, stop right there. They said, what, that guy with the motorcycle gang and that dark alley? I said, yeah, right there. He knows something. I can feel it. And they're like, this is a really dangerous area. We need to survey it first. I said, no, we don't have time for that. He's going to be gone. In fact, you guys are going to intimidate him. You stay here in the car. I'm going to go talk to him myself. These guys are like, oh, are you stupid? I said, no, I'll buy you pink panties when we get home. I don't have 2 weeks to figure out who's selling children. We got tonight. And so I get out. And I walk up, and this guy was sitting there on his bike, and he pulls up his shirt, and there's a little gun. You could see that was tucked in his pants. And I'm just listening. And to my heart. And I pull out a bill. I think it was like a $20 or even $100 bill. I don't remember what it was. And I give it to him, and he looks at it. He goes, what's that for? I says, that's for you. You keep it. I said, I have another one for you if you can help me with something. I got a rich friend in the U.S. He's coming in a few weeks. He wants to do a big party here. He likes 10-year-olds. You connect me with somebody who can provide that. I'll give you some more. Now, he's what I call a level 1 trafficker. These guys they're just drug guys or guys on the streets. Well, they're not going to get arrested, but they know. And sure enough, he knew one of the head traffickers in the entire country, connected me with that guy and another gal who was running an agency. And it ended up being the largest child rescue in one day in Haiti history with the connections we got through simply listening. So that's a long story, but it really brings to the point of, we're not physical beings having spiritual experiences. We are spiritual beings having physical experiences. And when we can truly understand that and tap into that, our entire life begins to change. And we can, even build in my company, learning to listen from that place of the heart of who I should call and what meetings I should take and everything made a bigger difference than anything else that I could have done in building those successful companies.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, that idea of spiritual beings. And in a lot of these indigenous traditions that I lived and studied with, sometimes in these kind of new agey circles, you hear that, oh, I'm a star being and this and this and this. But from these indigenous traditions, they actually say that spirit originated from the stars. It originated from the heavens. And they're saying actually just that. So you're doing all of this work. I mean, I would imagine even with faith like a rock, and as you said, when you came to your first plant medicine ceremonies, you thought, like I think many of us do, like, I'm good, I'm strong, I don't need any help. But I would imagine, I mean, just being a human being, we all need help. But especially with what you were going through, was there some sort of kind of revelatory experience that when you sat with those plant medicines for the first time, that something kind of awakened in you, a download, a seeing things from a different perspective? And I think most people listening to this, because the majority of this podcast is about plant medicine, so I think most people are quite familiar with them. So I don't think we need to go into too much detail. But also, as you said, some people may not be. And as you said, a lot of us from the generations we grew up in, we viewed any sort of psychoactive substance as being harmful, dangerous. I mean, I grew up and I remember very well seeing Nancy Reagan on TV with breaking an egg over a pan and saying, this is your brain on drugs. And that kept me away from everything. I was an Eagle Scout, played sports, all of that stuff. So, but also for me, there was always something I was searching for, a deeper meaning in life. And I tried a lot of different things, and things gave me insights. But the first time that I sat with ayahuasca, it was revelational. I mean, it showed me that, as you said, that we are something more than just our bodies. And that really shifted my life. And was there something similar that happened with you that because that's a huge change that you've gone through. I mean, from someone who's coming from money, this kind of lifestyle, to then really wanting not only to work with children, but I think that's quite, as you said, I can understand how people would look at you and say you're sympathizing with pedophiles. And I think we can get into that in more detail, because I understand what they're saying, but I understand where you're coming from. And I think it's something that plants do when we work with them properly. They do begin to point to, which is that the only way of healing is through healing. And that we have to heal in order to move forward. It's truly the end of suffering. It's the end of war. It's the end of separation. And all spiritual traditions speak of this, that primarily suffering comes from separation. That we view the other as somehow different. But I know this is kind of a big question, and you only have to share what you want. But what were those first ceremonies like with you? And because I imagine that they must have had some very profound impact for you to be kind of being an arbiter of their work, being a harbinger now of their medicines.
Absolutely. I'll say this, before the medicine, I would tell my operators, I said, listen, if these guys are wasting our oxygen, these bad, if they have to die while we're here, that's great. That's even better than sending them to jail, type of a thing, And then after my first journey, I changed it to, look, it's not our job to judge. That's God's job. But if we need to arrange that meeting a little bit early, that's okay. But it was still that space. Now, I'm still of the opinion of, you hurt a child, you need to be in a place where you can never do that again. We need to put you in people say, if you had a room with 100 traffickers in this room, child traffickers, and you had the option to have a gun with no retribution or a microphone, and they had to listen to you for an hour or two. And I would actually take that microphone and I would take them into the pit of hell. And I would help them see exactly what I have seen with these children, and how ripped apart every part of their emotional life has been since that trafficking. And they would still go to jail, but I would take that microphone and pray for some sort of redemption. For me personally, the biggest breakthroughs were, number one, I think that I had my arrogance and my ego and the money was big enough that I had put up this shell around me, that I wasn't as sensitive emotionally to everything. I was risking my life to help kids, but from a interpersonal relationship standpoint, I was somewhat toxic in some of my relationships. And I remember the medicine, the very first time, gave me the purest sense of empathy ever. And it was the most horrific, beautiful experience of my life. I felt in every cell of my body, I could feel the pain that my children felt when I cheated on their mom. I could feel it. I could feel the depression and the anxiety of my workers if I didn't treat them with love and guidance and compassion. I could feel the pain of every person that I had offended and hurt because of me not being present in our relationships and our conversations. And it was so hard, and it was so dark. And I felt myself, I was literally in the pit of hell. It was so deep. It was so dark. It was so heavy. It was suffocating. And I had this playlist on my headphones, and I switched the playlist from this rhythmic journey music type thing. I changed it to my, what I call my redemption music, and it was some beautiful songs of redeeming grace type music. And it pulled me out, and I could feel all of this toxicity just coming off my body, and this light of this hand lifting me out of hell. And then I said to myself, Paul, did you learn your lesson yet? And so I flipped it back to the thump thump music, and whoa, man, the medicine just took me back into this abyss. And I could feel empathy in pain, as if I was each of those people who I had offended in some way. And then I also felt the suffering of the children, although that wasn't my doing. It was so beautiful for me to be able to feel their pain and their suffering, and then be able to feel their liberation and their freedom and that path towards healing. And it was a connection with humanity from a heart to heart standpoint, from a pure emotion standpoint, like I had never, not even 1/1000% had it never experienced before. And it was, like I say, the most horrific, beautiful experience ever in experiencing that pure empathy in every way and connecting with humanity in that way. And, over time, I had never meditated before. I had prayed, but prayer was very one-sided. God, fix this, sorry about this, amen type of a thing. And I never took the time to listen. And after that experience and really feeling that divine connection with all of humanity and with God, I yearned for that connection on a daily basis. And of course, there's no addiction stuff, and you don't want to take medicine every day unless somebody needs it for microdosing and whatnot. But for me, it encouraged me to pursue not only a healthier relationship in every human I came in contact with, but a healthier, more open listening relationship with God. And in my meditative process today, that I go deep, involves hape, involves a prayer of tuning into that right frequency in my heart. And part of that is releasing all judgment and loving humanity for where they're at. I still fund rescue missions. I still fund operations that put bad people in prison. but I can do so from a place of compassion. I can put them in prison from a place of compassion and ensure they don't hurt innocence again, but love humanity through the process so that eventually we can help them heal.
I think that's so important. I mean, you've I think touched on it beautifully, but is there maybe a little more you can share about that for other people as well? Because even this work with plant medicine, I mean, when I was learning from a lot of these indigenous practitioners, like often people would ask them these questions, like, "Oh, your work must be so easy. You're practicing love and light and beauty and peace," and they'd often look at the people and they'd say, "Our work is difficult. We're going into the darkness. We're going into the shadows. We're fighting forces of evil. It's tiring. It's taxing, but we do it from a place of love because we want to help." And as you said, again, correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but that 2 out of 3 people who are abused will not abuse, but that 1 out of 3 people will abuse. And that's something I saw a lot in my work. And it's this very difficult thing to come to terms with, which is from what I saw, most people who were an abuser were abused themselves. Now, again, I don't know the exact percentage, but it was an overwhelming majority. So what is that balance like? Because, you have these polarities. On the one hand, you have this kind of idea of, well, it's just all love and light and you shouldn't harm anyone. But there are bad people out there. There is, again, even from that indigenous perspective, from a religious perspective, there's battles of light and dark, and it's not a modern thing. It's been going on since time immemorial. And yet you also have this idea of compassion, of understanding that most people who are abusers have been abused themselves. And that also is really hard to, I think, in a way, to have compassion, because on the one hand, it does bring compassion when you realize, like, man, that person is doing bad, and I think it's harder maybe for us to focus in the abuse of a child, because that's the most extreme we can go to. But I think if we look on that in a smaller level, like, I'm getting angry at you probably because someone got angry at me, and when we look at things that way, it does bring more compassion. But what do you find is that line? Because there are things, I think, in our society where, and maybe we'll touch on this a bit more about why your film was controversial, because I think we are normalizing things in our society, which is beginning to blur the line between what's good and bad, what's right and wrong, what is darkness and what is light. And so how do you help people to find that balance?
I think it's super important to not confuse love and compassion with allowing somebody to harm innocence in any way. I can love the trafficker and feel compassion because of the pain that they have gone through, but my love for the innocence of those children supersedes all. And I absolutely cannot bring light and love to the world and allow darkness to continue in a place where it is harming innocence. And so you can do so from a warrior standpoint. You can have the sword of light and truth and love, and that sword can sever the darkness and can ensure that we fight for freedom and fight for innocence. However, that energy of hatred and that energy of division is simply continuing to fuel that thing that you're fighting. And so you have to, number one, ensure that you yourself are in a place of a solid foundation with a good heart and a connection with your divine self, and continue to fight for good, fight for light, protect the innocence of children and others, but do so from that place of compassion. And it's a hard line. You're exactly right. You're like, okay, I think we should just nuke them all, let them come back in a new reincarnation where they don't make those choices. They're not making those decisions. However, each one of us have to take a careful assessment of what things we are doing in our lives that are contributing, even if we're not abusing a child, which hopefully nobody on this show that's listening is. If you are one of those 1/3, maybe that comes out in physical, verbal, or sexual abuse. All of those are super, super dangerous and difficult for children to grow up through. But all of us are contributing in some way. If you think about this, let's say I call it tension transfer. Some guy has a bad day at work and he takes it out on his employees at work, and one of his employees goes home and he yells at his wife for something stupid or whatnot, and she now is feeling that negative energy, and she transfers that onto the kid who maybe was getting behind on some of his grades and yells at him and makes him feel stupid, and then he kicks the dog. That tension transfer went from the boss all the way to the dog. And take it even to this degree. Let's say that you've got some employees at work, you're having a bad day, you're not in control of your anger issues, and you belittle some new employee that you have, and you make him feel bad and unjustifiably put him in a state where he's carrying a lot of that negativity that you just passed on. And what you didn't realize is that he was abused as a child a bunch. His wife just left him because of his insatiable pornography addiction. This is his weekend with his little 8-year-old girl, and your toxicity that you pushed upon him ended up negatively affecting that child when he went home that night, right? So we all need to take responsibility. We all need to realize that indeed we are all connected. All of us. Guys, whether you like it or not, energetically, we are connected with all of humanity. That includes the traffickers. That includes the perpetrators. That includes that guy who was goes home to his daughter that night and we're connected to everybody and everything. And we have to raise global collective consciousness. We need to start with fixing ourselves. And people say, I can't fix the world. Well, you're right. There's 8.5 billion people out, 8+ billion people out there. However, if you take the next year and work on yourself, and then you take the next year and simply identify just two people, and mentor them and help them heal, and they pass it on. The next year, there's 2 people that they help, and it continues. That effect, 2 increased by 2 every single year, doubling every year. 33 years, you're at 8.5 billion people. You've literally helped heal the world by starting with the man in the mirror and passing it on and helping others to heal. So that's what needs to happen. Is we each need to take a look in the mirror and say, what do I need to change? How do I need to heal? How do I need to change how I show up in this world so that we don't have things like trafficking in the future?
I mean, what you're describing is a pretty, I think, revolutionary idea, and especially for someone who's been in the pits of that darkness. I mentioned a little with COVID, and even with my work, it's essentially working as a doctor, working to heal people. And I think one of the foundational aspects of that is you help anyone who comes in need, and to a large degree, you have to put aside your kind of views of them and to help them, because again, by helping them, you do not only make them a better person, but you make humanity a better person. And one of the interesting things I saw even in COVID was this, just what I saw as a horrible, this ideology, this division, this idea that maybe if you didn't get the thing, that you should be refused treatment, and from medical people, I saw that, and it's just such a counterintuitive way of healing the world. But again, it comes from fear, it comes from division, it comes from being in that darkness. So I just think that it's amazing that you've come to that realization. how do you begin to work in that way? I mean, do people come to you, or are you just working with people at large in the hopes that that will trickle down to people who may be abusers? Or are you somehow finding them? Like how does that work? Like how do you? I guess yeah. How does that work with who you're working with? And then maybe if you could explain what that process is like of working with plants and how that can actually get to the root of some of these issues.
So I'm only one person, and fortunately, because of the success of the Sound of Freedom movie and the success of my companies in the past, I have relationships with senators and royalty and world leaders and influencers, and so I work with what I call the tip of the umbrella, influencers that can really impact. And if I can help them heal through their trauma and help them lead from the heart, then we can help millions of people do the same. Number two, of course, in just being on podcasts like this and sharing from the heart and helping people see the world from a different light is super valuable. We do have retreats specifically for people who have dealt with some serious childhood trauma. We have facilitators that specialize that. And I think this is important for people who are in the plant medicine space to understand that the facilitators and the environment are everything. Many times the medicine has the ability to what I call thin the veil. Right? We come to this earth. We don't remember. We don't remember our life before with God, all each other. We don't remember any of that. We have this veil of forgetfulness and don't see things beyond our five senses. And the medicine has the ability to thin that veil. And if we're in a place where we haven't effectively set sacred space, thinning that veil in, somebody's at a rave party and taking mushrooms at the rave party, and you've got an orgy going on over there and rap music over there and all this negative energy. You're thinning the veil in a space that is not going to be healthy for your eternal growth. And so understanding the facilitators that really can provide that atmosphere. I have helped to facilitate over 58 guided meditation, plant medicine ceremonies. We've worked with, we bring in shamans that are, really understand singing the Icaros and whatnot with the Aya. Our specialty now is in psilocybin, and we're really, really good at using those tools to help people have a powerful mystical experience in a space that is healthy, where they come in with the right intentions, and we have them on a 4-day fully immersive experience. And we bring in facilitators. I'll bring in the tip of the umbrella influencers, and then I'll bring in facilitators as well, who are guys who have worked with the medicine. And we bring them in as participants in our space for 2 or 3 times, so that we know how, that they've released their crap and that they're in a really good energy space. And then I push people to them. We're expanding this globally, and I'm funding expansion of healing retreats and the training of facilitators, because I believe that just like that 2 by 2 can hit 8 billion people, if we can take 10 by 10 by 10, and training facilitators and help them lead from that space of truth and that sacred space, then indeed we can heal humanity in a very short period of time.
I mean, obviously these plants can work in so many different ways, and especially with each individual. But are there certain patterns or things that you see come up that facilitate that healing? Is it, like, for example, the idea of seeing things from someone else's shoes, like if you are an abuser, seeing what, like not only seeing, but almost as you described for yourself, really feeling that energetic impact that our actions have. Like what is it? I mean, especially if people aren't familiar with plant medicines, like what is it? Because I think a lot of people that sounds so foreign to them, that you could ingest a mushroom and somehow end that desire to abuse.
Yeah.
and yet I don't doubt that that's happening because I've seen it. But could you describe maybe? And again, you can't obviously describe someone else's experience exactly, but I think there are certain archetypes that can come up that would maybe shine light on somehow what the process is going on that's aiding that person.
Absolutely. So the average age of somebody who remembers and discloses of childhood sexual abuse, the average is 52 years old. That's my age, right? I've raised my kids. I've built my career. And if you're holding on to that deep-seated trauma through all of those decades, it is going to come out in anxiety and depression and PTSD and addictions, and the list goes on. And, the just ingesting mushrooms is never going to fix anything. Number one, you have to have a dose to the point where it's a mystical experience. Number two, it has to be in a sacred space. Number three, having a trained facilitator to help work through that's important. Number four, the intention setting space beforehand is vital. I spend a minimum of 1 hour, sometimes 2 separate sessions within a week or two before somebody comes into a ceremony on a Zoom call, going deep into their life and their background and the things that they want to release. And, and even the whole first day when we bring them in, it's all about release. It's teaching them some different breath work tools and whatnot. It's all release. And then the first night of ceremony is focused with that intention of releasing all those things that do not belong to you, that aren't part of your higher self. And then day two of the medicine is, actually, technically it's day three, because day two of the medicine though, but day three of the event is all on embracing, is on identifying this best version of yourself, because you have to release what doesn't belong to you in order to fully embrace what is. And so there's a lot of times there's generational trauma. In the medicine, it will bring some of these things up to the surface, and we have a lot of energy workers that can help people just break those ties and cut those cords and make it so that we're not tethered anymore by those pains of our past. And the things in your past, whether they were generational ones, whether it was past life, whether it was things in this life, whether it was things that you did or even things that were done to you, either one, all of them can be shed. All of them you can simply release. They're all going to require the help of your creator to do so, but all of them can be released. And one beautiful study that I read, one of John Hopkins University studies on psilocybin, that over 800 participants that were self-proclaimed atheists. We're not talking about just agnostic, I don't know if there's a God. I'm atheist. Over 800 atheists. There is no God. Over 2/3 of them, after one single dose, one single ceremony of psilocybin, 2/3 of them changed that self-diagnosis and said, no, there's a God, and I think that speaks volumes as to why these things are so powerful in helping people release trauma, see the world from a different space, get rid of the addictions. 85% of people who were addicted to smoking after doing a psilocybin journey, 85% of them were able to release those cravings, which is, you don't find that anywhere in any drug anywhere, which is just super beautiful and super powerful.
I mean, most of these substances have been basically illegal in most countries, but certainly in the United States for the last 60 years or so. There's been a lot of research with psilocybin, with MDMA, as you said, from Johns Hopkins. There's good organizations out there, MAPS, doing work on and studies on these things. Is there a reason that you've specifically begun working with psilocybin as opposed to some of the other sacred plants? I mean, one, it does seem like, I think, a very smart way to go, in that it is something that you can find like very abundantly still. It exists in the cultures that you're working with. But is there anything in particular that you found to be more useful in that?
We do host ceremonies with Aya and others that but we will bring in outside facilitators who know that space. Will simply help to hold space and bring them in for first time experiences. Sometimes ayahuasca is grandmother Aya. She's got a big stick and she'll beat the shit out of, and some people they're scared to death of going into a jungle and having a bucket and throwing up every 15 minutes. But, for me personally, after a handful in my transformation years ago, after a handful of psilocybin journeys, I was invited to go on an ayahuasca one, and that I thought that I had resolved a lot of my issues. And Mama Aya said, "Are you ready? You ready to really go deep?" And some of those hooks that were in me, those guilt and shame hooks, were so deeply embedded that my wife said that it sounded like I was being burned at the stake and yelling the F word at the top of my lungs. Mama Aya was compassionate and put me under anesthesia because I don't remember any of it, but it was open heart and open brain surgery in releasing some of those things with me, which was super powerful. But for us, we found that that the psilocybin allows us to dance a little bit, to kind of work with, especially if there's a guiding thing that we as facilitators need to be doing to help people release some of that trauma. The psilocybin is a beautiful tool allowing us to do so.
A lot of the listeners, I think, especially in the US and maybe even like the background you were describing for yourself, come from a religious upbringing. And I think these substances have been also very much demonized by churches, by religions. And I think your assistant sent me an interview you did, and I heard you mention this book, The Immortality Key. And I've mentioned it a number of times in this podcast. If anyone hasn't read it, I think it's an amazing book. But because I think it's a very common experience where maybe people who are a little disillusioned by the church, or in this case Christianity, but who still feel an affinity for the concept, often these plants can actually help them to bring them closer and to shed an even deeper light to their own connection. And something really interesting, like a book like The Immortality Key, which for me, I think is just the beginning. I mean, I think there's going to be more and more literature published on the origins of potentially all religion that was working with these sacraments. Can you speak a bit about that? Just that maybe from your own experience, that connection that these plants can actually even fortify our own connection to religion?
Absolutely. Just like those 800 plus atheists who 2/3 of them changed and came closer to God. And I found that in all religions that I've had I know a personal experience for me, which was really beautiful. I in my early days of my healing experience, my facilitator was there, and I was in this massive, stupidly massive, beautiful home that I had these huge statues in my great room of beautiful statues of Zeus and Poseidon and Atlas. And I told the facilitator, I'm on the medicine. I'm like, yeah, sometimes I feel like, I'm Atlas. I've got the whole world on my shoulders, and it's, I'm helping everybody, and I'm, I've got all these employees in this, but, God's made me strong, just like that Atlas strong. And I've got Zeus and Poseidon that are protecting me. And the facilitator, she said, I think that's beautiful that you're relating to some of those traits there. She said, about how's your relationship? She says, but those were mythology, Greek gods. There was one that actually walked this earth, and she pointed at this statue that I had over in this other corner of Christ. And it was about, 3 feet tall, maybe 2.5 feet tall, this beautiful porcelain statue. And she said, what about your relationship there? And, on the medicine, you're pretty honest with yourself. And I said, I don't qualify for a relationship with him. She goes, well, why not? I said, well, when I left the church of my youth, I was told by my bishop that until I was back in full fellowshipment of the church, I couldn't have a relationship there. She said, do you really believe that? I'm like, no, I'm a good person. She said, why don't you rekindle that relationship? And so I pulled that statue off the shelf, big heavy thing, and sat on a beanbag holding the statue of Christ for the next 3 hours, having the most beautiful, connecting conversation with my brother that I've ever had. And, in the book, The Immortality Key, it talks about how in the early Christian church, the psilocybin there's a lot of proof saying that it was actually in the sacrament because it helped to thin that veil and it helped to connect. And that indeed is what happened that night. And it was everything for me.
I think one of the beautiful things, also the more we learn about things, just the power of our perception, and even these ideas like in Christianity of the apocalypse, it's a word that's been just mistranslated. And it doesn't mean the end of days. It means the end of the illusion of time. It literally means to lift the veil. And the apocalypse isn't something to be feared. It's something that we're all longing for. How much do you see, because we are as a society, we're moving into a more secular society, a more atheistic society. And again, I think you can make an argument to the benefit of that. But I think often we don't want to look at what the potential downside of that. And I think a lot of our suffering of where the roots of these things come from is we've gotten away from that connection with the divine, however we want to call it. And it seems like these plants are something that is helping people to reconnect with that. And, as you said, without going and patching every single symptom of all of the innumerable downstream repercussions of that, like maybe just that simple thing can have an impact that's greater than we could imagine.
Yeah. I think that's everything, Jason. It's everything. Once we really know who we are, everything will change. Once we can live in the present moment in deep gratitude and see the divinity within ourselves and our connection, our oneness with each other and with the universe as a whole, and as we start to thin that veil, all of the toxicity of this earth will simply wash away. So I'm super excited because I believe that we're there. I really do. I think we're looking at a transformation of humanity like has never been experienced in all of history. Yes, this is the time that's been prophesied. I believe that most religions are right when they see this 1,000 years of peace after this time of tribulation. Things are going to have to get difficult so that people will come to their knees and they'll look heavenward. And in doing so, as that veil lifts, then there will be peace on earth. And I think we're going to see it in our lifetime.
Well, Paul, I think that's a beautiful way to begin to wrap up. I would really encourage people to see the film if they haven't. I mean, one question that I also wanted to ask you before we end is, when that film came out, it was very controversial, and it seems like that should be the least controversial of any film. I mean, we, especially in the U.S., we're in such a divided time. And again, we were speaking that the root of so many of our problems comes from this division of not empathizing with another person, not being able to put ourselves in their shoes. But it seems like a film like that is something that we all should be able to stand behind. I mean, that really is the darkest of the dark. And why do you think there would be any controversy whatsoever to that? I mean, it's a very strange thing. And, I know these can be taken in many different directions, but it does feel like there's something very concerted that would be against that in any way, shape, or form.
Well, unfortunately, things like this, child trafficking and child abuse, are are indeed the darkest part of humanity today. And those who are participating don't want light to be shown upon it. I will see this. There's a very, very specific agenda with big media and Hollywood today, trying to pull us away from the very divinity that we are, from our nuclear families, from the morals that were taught to us by our parents and grandparents. There's a very clear initiative, and in anything that is shining light on the things that we really need to pay attention to, or things that they're going to go against. And I will tell the audience this, and this is important to know. I made a very clear separation over almost 6 years ago with the Homeland Security agent that Jim Caviezel somewhat plays. In fact, most of our Navy SEALs and Green Berets made a separation there, and we're all super grateful for him and others that introduced us to this work. And unfortunately, the movie was already shot by then, and there's undue focus on one character. And the truth is, there's over 20 undercover operators and about 8 different rescue missions that were all put together into one single storyline. The hidden heroes are the real ones that are out there doing the work right now. The message should not be lost. In fact, this is one of the reasons why I finally decided to answer the call to go public a few months before the movie came out, is because we knew that there was going to be some backlash there and some things that would come out in the news, which indeed they have. So, if your listeners are like, oh yeah, there's a thing in New York Times last week about the guy in The Sound of Freedom. Yeah, that was the one that Jim Caviezel plays. And it's the thing that we all need to understand is that every one of us are going through a process. And, he's had some women that have come out against him with some allegations and whatnot. And, it's, as Jesus pointed out, when he drew the line in the sand, when they were getting ready to stone that woman, married to death, many believe that what he wrote is that him who is without sin cast the first stone. And, don't judge others because your sins are different from theirs. Understand that we're all in this process of growth. And the only way to heal humanity is for us each to look in the mirror and say, what am I doing to contribute to the negativity, and what am I doing to contribute to the positivity of this world? And that's really where it all starts. I love the old saying, this man was sitting there reading his newspaper, and his little boy wanted to play ball with him. And he says, you listen, just, I don't want to do that right now. And he took out this map of the world that was on a newspaper page, and he tore it up into little pieces. And he says, okay, you put that map together first. Show me how good you are at putting that map together. The whole, you put the world together. As soon as you do that, I'll come and spend some time with you. And about 5 minutes later, the little boy came back, and it was all taped together with every single, part of the globe in the right place. And the dad said, well, how did you do that? And the boy turned it over, and there was a picture of a man on the other side. He said, I just put the man together, and the whole world came together from there. And that's really what it's about. Each one of us need to look in the mirror, work on the one in the mirror, and everything else will work out.
Well, beautiful. I'd love to do a round 2, because I think that's a whole nother topic that we could spend another hour and a half on. And I think it's a really important one, because I think a lot of people maybe feel little seeds or little nuggets of what's going on, but I think there really is. There is this, as there always is, these archetypal forces of light and dark, and I think it's just that the darkness is becoming more aware to more people. But I think the more people who can shine light on that, the better. And there are a lot of forces that are, I think, conspiring to keep that light from shining. And I really just, I I think what you're doing is amazing. I think you are a force of that light, and just all the sacrifice you made, and the wisdom, the compassion. I really honor and thank you for not only your time, but just what you're doing. It's really special, and these plants do have the power to change the world one person at a time. Much like that kind of mycelium network that's connecting everything. Everything is connected, and even if we can only help one person, it's a lot more than one person. And if you're doing that in fold, blessings to you, because it's amazing. So thank you so much, Paul. I really appreciate it. And if people are interested in learning more about you or getting involved in your work or your charities, what's the best way they can do that?
The easiest one to remember is soundoffreedombook.com. That will link you right into the Liberating Humanity website. You can get more information on the book there. From there, you can go and learn about the retreats. You can get some free information to help your family. You can even link from there into the Child Liberation Foundation. If somebody wants to go directly to the Child Liberation Foundation, they can go to liberatechildren.org and get involved with the safe houses and things we're doing with the kids. You can follow me on any social media, just Liberating Humanity. So liberating, humanity or humanity, depending on the platform, just Liberating Humanity. I'll come up first as soon as you type in liberating. So super grateful for this time, Jason.
Great. I'll put a link to those in the show notes. And thank you again, Paul. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, that's it. I hope you enjoyed that interview. I think it's a really important interview. And something that hopefully all of us as humans begin to really look within ourselves and see how we can begin to heal these traumas within ourselves, to begin to look at darkness in ourselves. It's something that I've pointed out a lot, I think, in this podcast, which is that the only way that these things happen in the world is the darkness that's within each and every one of us. And hopefully not to the point of actually abusing a child, but there's all sorts of levels and layers to that darkness. And I think something like working with plants, or there's many different ways that people can begin to do that, but really that deep introspective work of really beginning to recognize all of the darkness in ourselves and to be able to heal that, to transmute it, to transform it. That's how we actually become harbingers of light, and that's actually how we begin to change the world. So I really, really honor Paul and what he's doing, and really honor everyone who's on this journey of working with and moving towards light by going into darkness. So as always, if you're able to support this podcast, that's a really big help to me. Patreon is a really good option. You can sign up for as little as $1 a month. There's different tiers you can sign up for. Those tiers also give you different things back, things like early access to shows, bonus material, Q&As. To all the people supporting that way, as always, thank you very much for your help. I really appreciate it. And if you're able to do that, thank you in advance. If you're not able to do that, helping with the algorithms is really helpful. So if you're viewing this on YouTube or Rumble, hitting the subscribe button, turning on the notification bell, liking the video, and if you're listening to this on Apple Podcast or Spotify, leaving a star rating and a short review. My interviews after this, I'll be releasing an interview that where I was interviewed on a woman's podcast named Shona Home. I had Shona on my podcast. I really enjoyed that interview, and then she invited me on her podcast, so I'll be releasing that interview on this channel. I have an interview coming up with a guy, a mycologist, whose name is Jasper. That should be a really fascinating conversation. I'm hoping to interview another Shipibo, Onaya, Ayahuasquero, Curandero. His name is Purvis. Hopefully that will be in the next few weeks as well. And as always, I hope to bring on some really fascinating guests. So again, I hope this finds you all well. Thank you as always for tuning in. Thank you for the support, and I will see you all on the next episode.
Tunga. Doom.